Hi everyone. In this video we are covering the material from section 2.1 in your statistics textbook. And in chapter 2 of the textbook we're talking about how to represent data visually. And in section 2.1 we're going to be talking about specifically qualitative data. And I think then in section 2.2 we're talking about quantitative data. Right, so again, today we're talking about looking at graphs and making graphs for qualitative data. And let's just take this example here. And we're going to talk about how to create what we call a frequency distribution. But the idea is you're going to watch cars that pass through any given intersection in Midland. And you're going to make this list of what you see. So, as you're sitting on the side of the road and watching, you see a GM, and then a Chevy, and then a Toyota, and then a Chevy, and then a Tesla, and then a GM, and then a Subaru, Honda, Chevy, Honda, Tesla, Ford, and so on. And so maybe you're making this list in your notebook as you're watching the cars drive by, and this is what you have at the end of the day, or at the end of the hour probably. What a frequency distribution is this table right here. And so what this table is showing us is that there were actually 9 Honda that we counted out of this, raw data. And there were 8 Toyotas, and there were 7 Chevys, and there were 7 Fords, and so on. But what we have is a list of all of the different types, and then a list of all the frequencies that we saw them, right? So whenever I say I saw 9 Hondas during the experiment, that's just saying that we had a frequency of 9 for Honda. It's always good for a frequency distribution to include the total. I mean, that's just convenient for people who are looking at what you're doing in the data. It's a nice little descriptive statistic to throw in there is the total number of units that you observed, and in this case we observed 50 cars. So that's a nice addition to a frequency distribution. When we talk about relative frequency, a relative frequency is going to be the number of occurrences divided by sample size. So that's an important formula. And in this case, if I want to turn my frequency distribution into a relative frequency distribution, we have to use that relative frequency formula. So here on the left, I have a frequency distribution, and then we're going to turn it into a relative frequency distribution. So the way this would work is, I've got my total is 50, and my Hondas is 9. And so we say for the relative frequency, it'll be the number of occurrences over sample size. So there was 9 occurrences of Honda over a sample size of 50. And so 9 divided by 50 is 0.18. And if I want to represent 0.18 as a percent, I just have to multiply 0.18 times 100%. So 0.18 times 100 turns into 18, so I have 18% for Hondas. So out of my sample, I observed 18% of the cars I saw were Hondas. And so you can repeat the same process for any of the cars here on this list. Like Teslas, for example, represented 9 total occurrences out of a sample size of 50. I think I misspoke a second ago. There were 4 occurrences of Tesla out of a sample size of 50. And so 4 divided by 50 is going to be 0.08. If I want to represent 0.08 as a percent, I just multiply times 100%. And that's going to give me 8%. And so that's why you see it there as 8%. And so this is what makes it a relative frequency distribution, is because it's relative to the total sample size. And again, I put total as 100%, but that's kind of redundant because you always expect the total to be 100%. That's more than anything, this is just a check on my math, that if you add up all of these percents individually, the sum of these should be 100%. After we have a frequency distribution, you can create a bar graph. And likely you already know what this means, right? So if the Honda bar reaches up to the 9 level, that means we saw 9 Hondas. Kind of self-explanatory, the bar graph. One thing I want to point out is that for what we consider a proper, like a properly configured bar graph, we like to go in order of greatest to least. So you'll notice that the bar graphs, or the bars, are decreasing in height as we go from left to right, because I've already ordered my data greatest to least. And we do this because it's easy to compare the relative heights of Honda and Toyota when they're side by side. But if Toyota were all the way on the other side of this bar graph, you can still compare them, but it's just not quite as easy. And the idea with data visuals is you want the data to be as easy to understand as possible for anyone who's looking at your visualization. And so anyways, it's just nice to have them ordered greatest to least. So continue our example. Suppose that first intersection we were looking at and noticing the brands or the makes of the cars. Suppose that was in a middle class neighborhood in Midland. And now we're going to go to one of the fancier neighborhoods in Midland, and we're also going to look at models of cars. And we'll see how it changes. And we can represent this using I don't know why that happens sometimes. Here's what's called a side-by-side bar graph. And what my legend is telling me down below the graph is that the blue bars represent the middle class and the orange bars represent the upper class. And so a side-by-side bar graph just means that you put these two categories side by side so you can compare and see the differences between the middle class brands and the upper class brands, right? And so by just looking at this graph, you can very easily tell from the data that, the middle class owns more Hondas than the upper class, and the upper class is more likely to own a Tesla or a BMW or a Mercedes and so on when compared with the middle class. And so this is just a good way to compare two data sets by placing them side by side. So just be aware, this is what a side-by-side bar graph looks like. A horizontal bar graph is mentioned in your textbook. And again, this is one of those that's self-explanatory because you can see right here that all we're looking at is the same idea, the same thing, but instead of having vertical bars, we have horizontal bars. So hopefully there's no confusion about that. The last thing that we're going to talk about, the last way to, present your qualitative data visually is called a pie chart. And I'm sure most of us have seen this before, but if you take some relative frequency distribution, like we took this from a previous slide, we can use a circle and divide it up into different wedges to show the different slice of the pie that each take up, right? So again, just going back to one of our data sets, we can see that Hondas, making up 18% of the sample, actually have the largest slice of the pie. And then again, it's nice to have your data ordered from greatest to least so that the slices are actually getting smaller as we go clockwise around the circle. I personally like this method of labeling each slice right on the pie and not having like a separate legend, because it's not that much extra work, and I think it makes it a lot easier to identify what's going on here. And so I like the little labels with basically what is the slice and then how large is the slice numerically. And what we're going to do in the rest of this video is I'm going to demonstrate using Microsoft Excel how you can create these data visuals, because that's going to be just as important as being able to recognize them is actually how do you create these yourself. And so we're going to start off with creating a bar graph. Here is the data that we use to create the bar graph. So this is just a big table with different names of car brands. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off by creating that frequency distribution that we saw. And so as a frequency distribution, I'm going to want to maybe just list the names of all the makes that I have in this table. And so I'm just looking at the table and typing, I see GM, I see Chevy, I see Toyota, I see Chevy again, I see Tesla. And I'm only listing it if it's a brand new make that I haven't listed before. All right, so Honda is new. Ford is in there, Dodge. So I think these are all the unique car makes. Oh, there's also BMW and Mercedes-Benz. That might be all of them, so we'll try this. What I'm going to do, and this is just kind of a nice Excel trick. It's the tricky part of using Excel is getting used to the formulas that are useful. So I'm going to type in equals, and then I'm going to type in count if, open parentheses, and then it's asking for a range that I want to count stuff in. So I'm going to select this whole range of cells and then type comma. Then it's asking what is the criteria. Well, I want to count how many GMs we have, so I'm going to select that cell that has the name GM in it. And I'm going to close parentheses and click enter. And what this is telling me is that Excel found 6 instances of GM in that whole field, right, by using the equals count if formula. And so that one's nice. Just because I want this blue field to be locked in place and count the same, cars each time, I'm going to use dollar signs to lock the B2 in place, and then I'm going to put $F, $11 to lock F11 in place. Click enter again, and now I'm going to copy and paste this formula across the whole range of cars. So now what Excel is doing is that for any given car, let's try like Tesla for example, I can click up here and see that it's now referencing Tesla, and it's counting how many Teslas appear in that blue field. So there's 4 Teslas total. Now, I'm going to highlight this group of cells, and you can see at the bottom, maybe you can't, it's really, really small, but on the bottom of the screen I can see that the total is 50 here. And in fact, let's go ahead and make a total row here. I'll just type in total, type in equals sum, open parentheses, and then select this whole range just to add up these numbers, and I get 50. And just to make sure that, maybe I should have 50 because maybe I misspelled the name of a car brand or I didn't see one, I'm going to type in equals count, and then I'm also going to select this blue range just to make sure that the total number of cells in here is also 50. Oh, well, who knows why that formula isn't working for me. Let me try count A, that might work. There we go. So count A counts any cells that have anything inside them at all. And so again, there's 50 cells in that range, so I did capture all of the values. Now I actually want this ordered from greatest to least if I'm about to make a bar graph, right? Because I want my bars to be labeled greatest to least. And just to show you what they might look like if I create a bar graph without ordering them, right? I'm going to select this range that has both the names and the numbers. But I'm not going to select the total. I don't want a bar that's 50 units tall just to show me that there's a total of 50. Instead, I'm going to click Insert on the ribbon up here. And next to where it says Recommended Charts, I'm going to click this. You can see the little bars for the bar graph. And then what I want is a 2D column, I think, if I want vertical bars. So I'll click 2D column here. And I usually don't include a chart title, because if I'm including a chart as part of a PowerPoint or a paper, I'll describe what the chart is all about somewhere else. Now, this chart is already looking pretty good, in my opinion, except like I said, these bars are kind of far apart. And so if you want to compare the relative size of like GM, Chevy, Toyota, and Honda and Ford, well, they have some separation between them. And of course, you can still compare the two, but just to make this a proper bar graph, let's go ahead and put those in order first. So to order these, I first want to change these numbers so that they're not just the result of a cell formula, but they're actually frozen in place. And so to do that, I'm going to click Copy over here. And then under Paste, I'm going to use the drop-down box under Paste to just do what's called Paste Values. So I click Paste Values. And now you'll notice that these cells are no longer formulas, but they're actually just the numbers themselves. And so that allows me to select these guys. I'm going to go up here under Home on the ribbon to go to Sort and Filter. And I'm going to click Custom Sort because I don't want to sort alphabetically based on car name, but I actually want to sort by the column that contains the number 6. I'm going to uncheck this box that says my data has headers because I see that it's excluding GM. And I want to include GM, so I'll uncheck that box and it actually selects the data I want. I want to sort on cell values and I want to sort largest to smallest. So after I have the right options selected in my sort feature, I click OK. It has my values sorted largest to smallest, and so again, I'll select those values. I'm going to go to Insert on the ribbon, go across to where I found my column graph before. So I get my vertical bar graph, delete my chart title, just like I did before, and now that is a good-looking bar graph. If you were really picky, the way that I'm really picky, you can actually click anywhere on these names, go back to Home, and you'll notice that these words, for some reason, these labels, are actually not black, but they're actually a gray. They're like 65% black as a grayscale. Anyways, I like to actually have them be black because they pop a little bit more on a paper or a PowerPoint, and so I always change these to black. Just to make it more readable on a paper or a PowerPoint, instead of having 9-point font, I'll boost that up to 11-point font. Same thing with these names. They start off as 9-point font by default, so I boost them up to 11-point font to make them more readable. And then if you want to change the font, of course, you can change that to something nice, like my favorite font, which is Cambria Math. And so that's, again, totally up to you. Calibri is not a bad font either. But here's your bar chart that's ready to go. Okay. What if you wanted a side-by-side, not side-by-side, what if you wanted a horizontal bar graph, right? So let me select the same data, go to Insert, go back over here where it says Insert Column or Bar Chart, and then again there's another 2D bar that puts it on its side. Again, you can get rid of the chart title, and if you're picky like I am, you can make those names and numbers black and boost the font size to an 11. That way it looks better when you put it into a paper. And that may or may not come in handy for your project later. So it's nice to know how to manipulate data visuals on Excel. I'm going to get rid of these and move on to create a let's see, relative frequency distribution. And to remind you, well, I guess not to remind you, but I'm going to create this table by typing in equals and then just moving over and selecting Honda. And I'm going to copy that formula and paste that down so that I have everything I need to create a table. And then remember the formula for relative frequency. So relative frequency was the number of occurrences divided by the total, or the sample size. And to keep that total cell locked in place, I'm going to use equals I3 / $I $13. So the dollar signs just lock cell I13 in place so that whenever I use the drop down, it will use the same reference. So if I click on BMW here, it's doing 2 divided by 50. And here you can see that I've got the relative frequencies listed as decimals. If you prefer the percent, let me show you how to get the percents. I'm going to select this data. I'm going to go over here to where you see the percent, so under the home part of the ribbon, where it says percent style, all you have to do is click and boom. Excel will convert those to percents for you. So here is our relative frequency distribution. By the way, if you ever wanted to use these tables in a paper, what you want to do is select them and then go over here where it says all borders and click on that. And that way the borders will actually show up in your paper. If you forget to do the all borders and you just copy it into your paper, I don't think that Microsoft Word will insert borders, and so it'll just be kind of floating names and floating numbers. If you want to shade these in so that it just looks nicer, maybe you could put a nice green background. Big fan of green. And if you want to make the total line look a little bit different, maybe you highlight the total line and you go back to borders and do a thick outside border and maybe bold. That might make it pop a little bit. By the way, in Excel, if you want these two cells to be formatted the same as these two, you can select these two cells, click Format Painter, and then select these two. And that will carry over the bold and the outside border. Notice it did get rid of my percent, so I can go back here and click percent again to make that 1 into 100%. But now I have a relative frequency distribution, and the thing that you can do with a relative frequency distribution is hold these guys or select these group of cells and then go back to Insert on the ribbon, go back to where you see the pie chart, and we're going to insert a 2D pie, just like that. Now this is a pie chart, but it's not the way that I like to see it, so let me just show you how I would change this up to make it look nice as you copy it into a PowerPoint or copy it into your paper. We're going to select chart title and get that out of here by just clicking the delete key. And then again, I'm not actually a big fan of the legend, right? Because sometimes it can be tough to tell the difference between this color in Mercedes-Benz and this color in Dodge. You know, they're both brown. And heck, even looking at BMW versus Chevy, those are both grays. And the blues can kind of be confusing and look alike. And in fact, if you tried to print this paper, and if you printed it in grayscale, because maybe you don't have a color printer handy, then there's no chance that you're going to be able to tell which color corresponds to which slice. And so I'm going to select this legend and just get rid of it because it's useless to me, honestly. And instead, we're going to try to find how to add those little elements. I think they're called data labels. So let's go over here to this green plus sign, and then we're going to check data labels. And that at least gives me 18%, 16%, 14%, and so on. So that's a little bit helpful. I'm going to use this arrow to the right here and see what's going to make it better. Here we go. That's my favorite. So where it says data callout, that's what we're going to select. And you can actually use your mouse to just manipulate these a little bit. Like where things are getting really hectic with the smaller slices of the pie, you might want to grab those and just move them out a little bit. That way we can make room to actually see Subaru, Dodge, BMW, and Mercedes-Benz. So this is, in my opinion, a good looking pie chart. The last thing you might do is select the data callouts, go back to home, and just make sure that those are black instead of grayscale. Yep, that looks better. And then also you may boost the font size to 11, but that's really up to you.